welcome to Your Real, Your Ideal podcast. Today we're going to talk about how we don't work with assholes. How about that, Sandy?
I love this topic.
I know. I'm Amy Tokus, and I'm coming from cold, rainy Omaha, Nebraska today.
And I'm Sandy Lane, and I'm coming from cold and rainy Durango, Colorado today.
Right.
And, it's okay. We need some rain. There's a lot of fires going on. We had a lot of smoke over here, and yeah, we had the fireplace on last night. It was
nice.
a difference, you know.
Nice. I thought about it. I decided to bake cookies, because
good.
I had kids home, and so I was like, I'll bake some cookies, and I'm sending out care packages and drinking lots of hot tea. That's what we're doing here.
I did get an extra coffee in the afternoon yesterday too, a drive-through coffee, which I don't do a lot of. But I'm like, okay, that's kind of my little guilty indulgence of a rainy afternoon. Had a nice lunch with a couple friends I've made here, and it was not a wine lunch. We all had work to do, but it was a combination of hot tea and hot drinks around the table.
Yeah, right. It just feels good to drink something warm and have soup and all that stuff in this weather. But I am not ready for winter. I love summertime, so I'm ready for it to get back to being warm again.
I like fall. I like the change of seasons, but let me say, change of season to winter lasts about a day, and the change of season from winter to spring is much more of a joyful event. How about that?
Oh yeah, completely agree. Yeah. Okay. I don't work with assholes. This is a motto that Sandy and I both have in our businesses and in our lives. So, Sandy, do you want to share the story?
Well, the story, because there's always a story.
There's always a story.
So, with Amy and I, with our businesses, we have our websites. And even though my background is in finance, I do a lot of things with speaking and people and workshops. And there is a page on financial and working from a consulting standpoint on that. But where it came from is I was talking with a potential client, and we were talking, and she made the comment, well, I looked on your website. Are you doing a lot of this type of work? It was kind of vague on it. And I'm like, I got to be really honest with you. I'm really picky about who I work with. I only take on so many financial business type customers, and I don't put a lot out there because it's kind of an interview both ways, and I tend to have a lot of work. And then what I said to her was, I kind of, again, being maybe transparent to a fault, but we had a good conversation at that point. And my comment was, if I could post a page that says, I don't work with assholes, and just put that disclaimer out there and then have a conversation, we would all be good. But I don't think I can put that on my website. And she laughed and she said, okay, I get it. And I'm like, I don't have to work with everyone. And I'm not out there to pick up every client I can to move forward. It's more important to me that I have quality clients, and I really don't work with assholes. And I laughed about it and then shared with you, Amy, how, gosh, if only we could have like a page or a disclaimer saying, I don't work with assholes. So if you want to move forward, check the box and at least get that out of the way right away. But I don't know if there's an automation feature in a good CRM for that, or if we could do a background check to double check. So it started our conversation on, what does that mean? Can it successfully be done? Is it a pipe dream? Yeah, and why that's so important, and why, I guess I would say, wouldn't that just be common sense? Kind of like, I'm not friends with people that are mean to me. I'm not going to marry somebody where it's not a good mutual relationship. Why does it seem like it's such an outlying theory to work with people when it's a mutually beneficial relationship that values each other, and why we think it's okay to be an asshole at work?
Right. And I think we're at the point in our careers where we can make that call. Right. But I remember when I first started my business, I would work with anybody who called me. And I was like, but
how we're trained.
Right. Exactly. It was like, yes, I need business. I need to get started. I need to be going. And, but I kind of learned my lesson of the rewards did not outweigh the pain of working with that person and the struggles. And I will say,
No,
working
it's
with
like,
people like that,
right.
yeah, working with people like that made me create really good boundaries around,
That's a great point.
what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, having conversations, setting up those boundaries and things like that. But I do think, and we're fortunate enough that we can do this in our businesses, but this is a bit of a privilege to be able to do it, because like my daughter, one of my girls works at Starbucks, and this summer she was working there and they had, you had to have a mask on. Well, people are being kind of rude about that in some places, and she had, not every day, but occasionally she would have a story about someone who came in and was really being mean to her personally, about the policy, and storming out. And, she doesn't have a choice on that, unfortunately. But I will say the culture in the coffee shop was very supportive. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's not like they hung any of the employees out to dry. So the culture was pretty supportive, but she didn't have a choice of who she worked with because she's in customer service.
Right.
So and that's a little bit of a different
But don't
scenario.
you think too, and hopefully, back to as we mature and we have more choices, those lessons help gear the other ones. And one thing I
Yeah,
challenge people on is they they think they don't have, when you said we have that luxury, you actually have that luxury before you actually realize it. And people put it off and say, I'm going to, until I get my next promotion, until I'm going
mm-hmm.
to allow this, because until I get my next promotion, until I get to this much revenue base, because they think they're going to lose all these clients, or that there isn't going to be somebody there to replace it when you have your own business, or it will hinder me from moving along. Maybe there's a different, if depending on the situation, the reality is many times opportunity will see itself outside of that bad situation.
Yeah,
Another client will come up and fill it, and there's not so much a perfect time, but it's being and with your daughter, it's being really clear with your values, and you're not going to walk out the door, but she's learning, and she's probably killing them with kindness, sticking with the fact.
right,
What I see happen sometimes in situations like that, three customers behind are, they just learned a lesson, because they're going to
yeah,
leave there and not be so crabby the next place. There's a pay it forward mechanism, because maybe that customer was an asshole, but the next three behind said, wow, this poor girl, she's doing her best. And I'm
right.
going to be better and a better customer the next time around, because I just saw this happen.
And you know what? That's exactly what happened. Is typically the people in the surrounding people were very stepped up, said something supportive. It was just that one person. But you know what? I think you're right. There's an opportunity at any point to call people out for being the asshole
Right.
in a work environment. I had a boss, um, when, young, starting out, he was pretty bad. Like everybody knew he was bad. He was kind of that verbal yeller,
Oh,
get angry. And this was, I'm not even going to say where I worked at the time because
right.
it's too much information. But one of my colleagues called him like the abusive dad, because you like never knew when he was going to erupt and call you out and yell at you and stuff like that. And I took it for about a couple of years. I worked with him and everybody else was wonderful. His boss was wonderful. And I was, connected well with him and his boss's boss, and um, everybody, like all levels, they were wonderful except for this one guy. And we all
Right.
knew he was the problem. But nobody stood up to him and nobody said, this is not acceptable. And I think we could have handled it differently, by stepping up and all of us creating an alliance and saying, this is not acceptable. This isn't the way you treat people. Now, I was working with 50-year-old men and I was a 20-year-old girl. And
Right.
so I was probably not the person to do it. And those 50-year-old men, they were used to working with this guy.
Right.
And so, but I bet if at that point, I was like, I have no control, but I probably did have some control if I just would have started the conversation and said, this isn't how you treat people. And, um, and called him out on it when it was happening in front of other people. So everybody knew it was okay to say, you can't be like this. You may be getting results
Right.
and that people may be saying, oh, look at how great this area is being run and how efficient it is and how, but if everybody's miserable, which most people were,
Right.
then what's the win in that situation?
I think you made a really good point about calling out. And what I have found is, first of all, by doing it when it's timely, and it needs to be a specific instance, because
Right.
unfortunately, when there are blanket comments like he treats people badly, and maybe give a
Right.
couple and it's too far after the fact, defensiveness kicks in. It's not
Yeah.
using real during the time, very, again, being very calm about it, but being very factual and saying, it's not okay to yell at Susie when she makes a mistake. We can talk about we can
Right.
talk about this, we can move on, but it's factual rather than a blanket comment later. So, and it
Right.
actually is a better strategy with assholes, because typically they're really good about covering their stuff up. Now, one thing, and I have
Yeah.
a little story, but one thing that I looked up as we were digging into this, and I do want
Oh
to point
yeah.
out that we put a poll out across all of our social media
Mhm.
platforms, and it was a resounding, I think 70%, or was it even higher than that, that said they wanted the topic to be, I don't work with assholes.
Yeah.
And so one thing I did is I thought, okay, there's certain, asshole kind of sounds like a guy, right? Just like you have these common, what do people say when they break up with a girl is a bitch or she's crazy, right? They like to use
Mm.
those terms. A guy is an asshole. So one thing I did pull up, because it's so universal, is I pulled up the Urban Dictionary for what an asshole is. Okay. So the Urban Dictionary definition is, it's an asshole is a person who is intentionally, that word, cruel, obnoxious, and heartless. They're often male, and a female is typically referred to as a bitch, but let's just say in this we're talking about both. This is gender
Right.
neutral. Okay.
Gender neutral. Yes.
General neutral. And it says, be warned that a genuine asshole is a combination of intelligence and arrogance that typically want to humiliate other people to elevate themselves up. So to me, it's intentionally being mean to people to make themselves be better. Okay. So that being
Right.
said, working with somebody you don't get along with for other reasons, they're pushing an agenda because they have a tight deadline and somebody's on them, and so they're not caring that you want to be home with your kids. Are they intentionally being cruel to you? Maybe that's a bad work environment, they're working you to death, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily an asshole. And so the term in this, my reason for
Right.
bringing up the definition, is these are people that are really intentionally being mean, cruel, and have motives outside of the team, others. Their motive is really themselves. And there's other ways to work around bad situations, but in one that is with somebody like that, and that's what we're saying, is it's not all relationships are easy, but working with an asshole is impossible to be a good situation other than tolerating them. um, there's a phrase I always like, and because that's part of it too, if they're behaving that way toward you or to someone, that's just not a good way to work. And
Right.
go where you are celebrated, not where you are tolerated. And nobody wants to be tolerated or especially be mistreated. Um, but my story in the working world, back to us having the luxury right now, when I
Right.
was in the working world and we had our own client base, it was up to us to bring in the clients, but we had the corporate structure, right? And we were incentivized by having revenue, by having clients. So firing clients was not something we almost ever did. I mean, that just didn't happen because that didn't add to growth and what we, just like we're talking about, getting to the next level.
Right.
And I had a client that was verbally abusive to my staff. They lied. I saw them as a complete liability to us, but they were a big client and they had a lot of status in the area, knew a lot of people, went to a lot of the same events, higher society. Anyway, I just knew in my gut it was a bad situation and it was lethal. It was horrible. And they knew it because part of being an asshole was the main guy knew that I think it gave him a high, right? That he probably, not just us, but everybody around. And I had sought out the advice of a mentor of mine who was also their corporate attorney. And I explained the situation. I said, I got to cut ties with them. I know that sounds counterintuitive. And he said, you're making the right decision. And I fired the client. And it was about 15 minutes later, he must have called the president of my company. And I got a phone call saying, you can't do that. And I'm like, yes, I can. You can't make me. I can't. And we had this whole conversation. And the good news is my person from my company was very diplomatic. And after I talked him through it, in retrospect, I probably should have given him a heads up I was going to do it, but I think I was afraid I
Right.
would chicken out. Or he'd
Yeah.
tell me not to do it. So I did it
Right.
and asked for forgiveness later. One of the best things I ever did, Amy, and the client came back and like, you can't do that. We still want to work with you, and made promises. And I thought in my mind, maybe he'll be a better client to somebody else the second time around because he was told he can be fired. And I'm sure that wasn't cheap for him to start all over and re-educate someone. And maybe somebody did learn something from it.
Right. I think that's a good point because the more you speak up, the more people um, have a self-awareness of what they're doing and how, this isn't how you're supposed to treat people. And
Right.
so standing up for yourself means that the future could be better with
Well,
them.
and think about in your situation that you talked about, if you were 20, he was
Mm-hmm.
50, let's say another 45-year-old male at the time stood up and said, and I've had that happen many a times, where
Yeah.
somebody has stood up and said, don't do that, or that's not acceptable, rephrase it or leave, or just
Right.
really called them on their shit, right? Our last topic of conversation. But you
Yeah.
as a young woman then learn something from that. It was those things stay with you on how to handle situations because again, you're learning and it's experience just like your daughter. Any good manager, if they overheard it, would kind of take over and say, don't put them aside, but work together to ease that situation and, show her how to take steps, not to get run all over, but at the same time, not putting her in a situation where she's wrapping his arm behind his back and pushing him out the door either. Because
Right.
our world is full of assholes. They're not going away.
Completely. And I have employees and I always empower them to fire their clients because I'm like, you know what? It's not worth it. If you're uncomfortable, not being treated well, whatever the situation is,
Mm-hmm.
we have other people who want to work with us,
Right.
and we'll fill it up with people who honor us and yeah, and don't treat people like that. And I'm going to say there's something about work environments too that allow this to happen
Mm-hmm.
or nip it in the bud. Like what kind of work office culture, what is it that are they supporting their employees and giving them the support needed to not have to do this, or are they allowing people to act like that? And so, I'm going to say there's companies that do both. It feels like they're having the support, but they're also letting people act like that
Right.
because this person's been there for so long and they're so, um, you know, they're just a fixture in the company. So there's a little bit, sometimes there's both of that going on. Um, but knowing that you're supported, I think is really important for someone young going into a workplace and having the culture that lets you stand up and gives you an infrastructure, I would say, of having those conversations.
I always use the phrase, and this is probably my finance background, but follow the dollar and you will find the answer. And the
Right,
reality is when they're businesses, they're
right.
money, they're for profit. And again, back
Yeah,
to at the end of the day, our economy is run by businesses, and you shouldn't apologize for trying to make a profit, because we have for-profit
right.
businesses.
Yeah,
But if you follow the dollar, you will find the answer. Typically, the asshole syndrome comes from somebody who is generating profits, whether it be
right.
a high salesman, whether they're managing people, whether it's clients that add to the bottom line. We are all tempted with the dollar, and that's a reality. But the back to your point with culture is the problem is the downside of putting the person, the asshole that has, because rarely is the asshole left okay, that is somebody who doesn't add to the bottom line, right? Usually the assholes
Right,
at the
right,
bottom
right,
are left to go, right?
right.
So
Exactly.
usually the assholes that get the buy are those that are bringing in the dollar in one shape or another. But
Right.
I would argue that and say, back to the culture, it's hard to put a dollar. It's easy to put a dollar on the money that they generate, because likely if they're a good asshole, they bring it up all the time and they know what that number is. Okay. But the culture of supporting the dollar before the employees is so detrimental to turnover, to engagement, to uh, all the dollars that they're bringing in, whether it be intangibles or promoting the company from outside, because people are likely hearing about the asshole, whether it be spouses, whether it be others,
Mm-hmm.
discontentment. And it's hard to put a dollar on that, but I would bet my dollar that that's way higher than what the asshole is bringing in. Why do people in businesses
Totally.
tend to look the other way when it comes to
Totally.
that?
Right. And I think about going back to my example when I had that bad boss, I ended up quitting that job. They had invested all this time, training, um, and they even, tried to offer me a different position. But I'm like, I did not want
You're done.
anything to do with that company because I felt like they enabled that and everybody knew and nobody was doing anything about it. And so I was like, yeah, I don't even want to be there. And which is sad because it could have been a great career, but anyway.
Amy, do you find, so I have a question for you, because I'm going to go back
Yeah.
to a lunch I had yesterday. So
Okay.
you find that now that we have taken the step, we call it our luxury because we really enjoy having that option, because we really don't work with assholes.
Right.
If the asshole meter goes out, I'll have a conversation. And sometimes, they don't realize they're coming off that way, and we can mend the situation. But it's, if it passes the first time and gets through, I'm going to nail it right away.
Right.
Anyway, since we now have this luxury, and we're so far away from working with assholes, when I hear about it or hear people giving people a pass, it's just so foreign to me. Do you find that when you hear stories and you think, and it seems like people think that, oh, that just happens at work, or that's a pass, that I feel like I am in the twilight zone. And why would people allow that to happen, especially when they have a choice? It's one thing to mentor people, but if people have a choice, why on earth would they put themselves through it? And I find that people make a lot of excuses for the asshole. So my
Right.
comment from lunch yesterday was a very prominent person, uh, she was defending in how he acted and behaved, and it was purely being an asshole, calling people names, going nuts, but being very degrading. And her comment was, it's just business. He's a businessman and he worked in real estate, so that's just how he talks. And I'm like, why does anybody get a buy? But the automatic is for anyone, especially if they're a business person, it's okay. Then what I also heard is he's a man, so that's also okay. And then, so there is a little bit of gender there, because I don't think a woman could get away with that as much as a man, honestly. And then the third thing is that's all he knows. So, and my comment was, I wouldn't give my kids an excuse because they heard it from the neighbor kid or they berated somebody. You know, what if we all did that for everybody in our lives and said, that's okay? You know, but my point in all that, Amy, is, do you find yourself when people make comments like that, that maybe 20 years ago we would have just kind of moved on, but I just felt like I was in the twilight zone with that comment on how ridiculous I felt it was.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's I think we're at the point where we would step in and we would say something and we would call him on it. Like if that person was standing there calling people names and I was standing there, I would call him on it, because I have the confidence as a 50-year-old woman versus, you know, my 20-year-old self probably wouldn't have had the confidence to stand up to this older man. But or maybe I would have, depending on what happened. Right. But I think when you mentioned mentoring, I think that's the really good point, is, you know, showing that you can stand up to that and that it's okay and that you'll be supported, and mentoring people to do the same is pretty important, because that's how we nip it in the bud. And nipping things, the first sign of that attitude is also, you mentioned that, and I love that, because I have some clients, I have great relationships with them right now, but in the beginning, like, things would happen. Like I would get a text 15 minutes before our call, and they'd be like, I have to cancel. And then it would start turning. And so I would have to, like, okay, you know what? If you're canceling, I'm charging you, because this is a boundary. I can't be wasting my time scheduling you and you not showing up for our appointment. So, because that would be pretty, you know, and they don't even realize, but creating that boundary, calling them out on it, and making them realize this isn't the way you treat people, is something. If you nip it in the bud, then the relationship tends to go much better. And letting everybody know that, like, if I would have walked into that job and the first time he threw a fit, I would have said, yeah, you know what, that's not how you treat people. Then that would have probably instantly changed my whole experience at that job.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, back to the true definition of an asshole, they're also a pretty good manipulator. So taking the path of least resistance by saying nothing is what they want to accomplish. Okay. Right. Because they're they're creating this for their own purpose, because they are smart, and they, you know, there's manipulation. And most people, you know, I used to say, I actually used to tell clients this, if they complained about it, if there was a billing issue, they're trying to constantly negotiate. I'm like, if I'm going to work for free, I'm going to be home with my kids. And, you know, we had an understanding, and I have no problem if you don't want to work with me, but I'm not going to work for free. And if I am, I'm going to spend time with my kids. But the same thing would go in my mind as a young mother. Do I really want to fight this, or is it wasting energy? Because we all know working against assholes is energy sucker.
Oh my gosh.
That's what I would deal with is, okay, I really want to take this on, but yet it's going to be an energy sucker for me. And I'd rather be home making cookies for my kids on the first rainy day after I pick them up from school and had the fireplace going. That's what I want, and that's what I would take. So do we have more courage now that we have more time too?
Right. That's a really good question.
Right.
Yeah.
Because when
Yeah.
those thoughts go through your mind, Amy, back in the day, like, do I have time to deal with this? Is this
Right.
a fight I'm really, uh, is this something I want to take on right now?
Right.
Or is it
Yeah.
taken
Yeah. Yeah.
away from my family? So, which I think is a valid question. But that doesn't mean you don't have to take on the initiative of getting rid of the person, but calling somebody on an instance should be not a time sucker. If they decide to retaliate, it's a lethal, toxic environment anyway, right?
Right. 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 And so it's knowing your values, knowing your priorities, and making sure that the time and energy you spend are completely aligned with that, and the people you're working with are aligned with that.
You know what, Amy, you made me look at, this is good. It's like therapy. It's like running with my friends for a happy hour. And one thing and I'm going to say this at the end, but I'm just going to slip it in now. I think our next, when we announce the next podcast, I think we should do a happy hour for that one. And anybody who listens, if they're not walking, or they can go home and join us too. So we could do that just rather than getting past the coffee. But the thing that you
Okay.
think of is a mistake that I've made, back to I don't work with assholes. I had some real prominent assholes. I mean, very much, their picture would be in the Urban Dictionary with a couple of past engagements that I had, work or engagements.
Right.
And rather than taking my advice that I'm saying now of call it out instance by instance, right? So asshole instance versus blanket comments after the fact, right? Being
Right.
better about instance, I tended to want to take them on, right? I tended to want to save everybody else from them and try to make them go away, okay? That is exhausting, okay?
Right.
And it's a battle. I did that
Very
twice.
noble of
Mine
you.
was a very public battle.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was basically a whistleblower on one,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
said, he was an asshole to the 100th degree. And between treatment, between words, between lies, I mean, it was just a multitude of it. And I took that on, and it was absolutely exhausting, a time sucker. And if I would have done it all over again, I would have followed my advice today. And I guess we learned from our mistakes that instead of taking
Yes.
him on as a person and thinking I'm Norma Ray, ringing the bell and, going and being the unionized, is I should have called them on things one at a time, taking care. And if they were so bad, escalating them event by event, and eventually either decided that I needed to move on, move away. But rather than taking him on, in this case, him, could be a she, I should have taken on each situation and made a choice for what was best for me. That's probably what I should have
Right.
done, because that was exhausting. And it was a very public squabble.
Right. And that's pretty insightful that, yes, we learn from our mistakes, and we are coming at this conversation um, through a lot of mistakes that we've made.
Right.
I didn't speak up in my 20s. I don't even know, I don't remember situations in my 30s, but I don't know if I spoke up all the time in my 30s. Probably in my 40s, I started being like, okay, this is crap. I'm speaking up, but so we're coming at this as 50-year-olds that have experienced and survived and made mistakes, and we've seen what resulted from those mistakes, and we've also done it right sometimes, and we've seen what's happened from that, and we realize that speaking up sooner and handling it
Situationally, don't take on the
yes,
person, take on each situation right away.
right, and
Call it
that's
when it happens.
where it really results in a change.
Unless you're married to the asshole or related to them, then you kind of got to take them on if you want, because
I know.
you don't want, because
Yeah, and
every
so that's
asshole
a
has a
really good
mother,
point.
right?
Right. So But that's a really good point. Like, what if you're related to these people? Then that's a whole different ballgame.
Right. You got to take them on for a different level, and you are. And I'm just trying to think through here. We all have situations. I tell you, mine that come to mind aren't blood relatives. It's people that married, a blood relative,
Yeah.
but that act in a very bad manner, within family situations or otherwise. And it is easier to look the other way and say that's just the way they are and just avoid them, or maybe talk
Right.
back, or not the easiest thing to actually.
Yeah.
I have one situation that it is a family relative, and I'm kind of choosing to ignore it. And I probably need to take that one on. Look at Amy, I got the second to do after this. I had a
I
one,
know.
now I have a two.
Well,
I'm
this
ignoring
goes
them.
to,
I'm
I
ignoring
know.
them. They're being a total asshole to some people. Not that this is a family member that is being sunshine and love to people that can help him, and being an asshole to other people. And we all make excuses for him. And I finally said, I can't do it, but I'm
Yeah.
ignoring him and I'm not taking it on.
Yeah. Well, so this goes to our podcast. I don't remember which episode it was. I would have to look at the should I say or should I know?
Right.
And, when it comes to family, that's a little bit of a different scenario, because sometimes it is best just to turn away
Right.
and support the people that are being victimized, obviously,
Right.
and maybe encourage them to stand up if needed. But sometimes you just have to try to keep the peace in the family. Yeah.
But part of me, the problem here is I don't think he really knows. You know what I mean? Like, back to family, are they
Right.
electing to be an asshole, or are they not understanding how that looks? Are they somebody once told me or used this phrase about somebody who couldn't see something about themselves, and tell me, maybe you've heard this before. He was the clown standing in front of everyone with the clown nose, the clown shoes, and the clown hat, and everybody saw he was a clown but him. And sometimes people know they're being an asshole, and other times do they not really understand how their actions and words are perceived by others.
Right. Right. And that's another tangent, but everybody's perception is different, because somebody, he could have grown up,
Right.
and the perception of the way he talks is totally fine. And then, but if you're dealing with a different group, the perception's completely different.
Right.
And comes
But it
across
gets back to, are they intentionally mean,
Right.
heartless, and are they picking people out and being unnecessarily cruel in an intentional manner?
Right.
So, and maybe part of it, sometimes you don't know if it's intentional or not. You're sure going to find out if you call them out on it in a kind way. And that's the other thing.
Right.
I always have to work on this with myself, is not to let emotions go first. And because I can get emotional in my response if it hits a nerve, especially if I feel like somebody is bullying. If I feel like somebody is intentionally being mean, my knee-jerk reaction really isn't to be quiet and let it go. And this has gotten escalated as I get older. My knee-jerk reaction is to go in, swoop in, and, knock them down. Like Garrett would say, my defense mechanism, if I feel like somebody's being oppressed, or my claws come out. My emotion goes high, and I need to take a breath, because maybe I misinterpreted. Maybe my gut isn't right. And I do have to learn, and have learned and gotten a lot better in taking that breath and letting it pan out, because emotion and escalation does not help any situation. I don't think.
Very true. Very true. I used to, somebody told me one time, always assume positive intentions.
I love that.
Yeah. But when people are being assholes, it's worth asking, finding out what are their intentions, because are they.
But if there's emotion in my voice, or I'm upset, that's actually what they want.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
if their intent, so two-part, let's just say A versus B. A, they have good intent, right? Or they positive intent. So assume positive intent and it is true. B, they actually don't have positive intent. They're intentionally being an asshole. Okay. So me escalating and being emotional or getting pissed. Okay, I'm just going to use the word pissed because we're throwing out asshole piss shit in our podcast, which we're going to go clean for a while.
We're gonna have to.
We're going clean. But if I get pissed, if it's A, I'm not even going to get that out of them because I'm going to put them in the same situation. They're going to get defensive, right? Okay,
Right.
so there's no good out of that. If it's B and they're intentional and they really are an asshole, that's exactly where they want me, because that's manipulation. And now they've got it. I did exactly what they want, and I've now made the situation worse because they'll probably say she's a bitch. And
Right.
there we go.
There we go. It's a full circle moment.
It's a full circle.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Self-awareness, taking a breath. I've gotten way better about it. So, but something always good reminders to work on.
Completely. I think this is all good. Good conversation. Okay, so we had a question about this topic. Is this impossible unless you actually work alone?
Like, how do you avoid assholes?
I know, right? Right. Which we kind of talked about this. You know, you're right. We have the luxury of picking who we work with, but some people don't. And if you work alone, then you know that, well, maybe you are working with an asshole, but it's you. But if you're like, you know, oh, go ahead. You can
So what I'm thinking
my
is,
mind is spinning right now.
I think two things. First of all, the definition of asshole shouldn't be so universal that somebody's difficult to work with because they have tight timelines. Somebody doesn't understand because you have young children. Okay, so first of all, an asshole is somebody who is intentionally trying to be cruel. Okay, so I think that also narrows the pool a little bit. We're all going to work with, unless you work alone, you're going to work with people that aren't the easiest to work with, but that doesn't make them an asshole. Okay, so that'd be my first.
They may not have patience. They may not be
He
short
has
in time, all
understanding,
that
may
stuff.
not be an
Yes.
empath.
Yeah.
They may not there could be all different things. They may not
Yes.
understand your background or respect it, but it isn't intentional cruelty. Okay, intentional mean.
Right.
But the second thing I'd say is this impossible if you work alone? I think you can accept, you can't change them. So it may be, you cannot change somebody being an asshole, but you don't have to accept their asshole actions. Okay. So it's like we talked about. So the point is, it's not about just crawling in a hole and saying, okay, I guess I either can't work or be self-employed, but it's about not allowing them to be an asshole in the work environment or making it an unacceptable behavior rather than an acceptable behavior. So it kind of gets back to culture and calling things when they happen. So you're not going to change the asshole. You're not going to change the instance. You have to let it play out on its own, but you don't have to accept their asshole behavior without stepping up and saying something. If it's not them, it's to your supervisor or on the instance. That would be my answer to it.
Yeah. And also letting some natural consequences happen. Don't protect them. Let them reap the consequences of their actions. And I'm just gonna, one thing that's resonating with me through this whole thing is addressing the action, not the person. Yes. And so it's, you know, you can be a good person and do something bad, but making sure that we're talking about the actions and not attacking a person. And we've kind of done this in the title of our show. I don't work with assholes. We should say, I don't work with people who act like assholes, you know, because
I don't accept their asshole behavior.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Be an asshole on the golf course, you know, be an asshole wherever you want, but not when we're working together.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so something that I forgot to do in the very beginning, and we were talking about cuss words, and
Right.
it spurred me on, is we are now on iTunes, and iTunes is a little
Woo!
picky. iTunes alerted us that, you know, we need to be careful with our language. So
Because we're such potty mouth, Amy.
I know. I know. So the good news is we are now on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on, I think, 6 different platforms now, last time I looked. And I can't remember what all of them are, maybe next time. But if you are listening to us on any of these platforms, please subscribe to us, rate us, review us.
Yes.
And yes, because we're having a good time with this, and we want to keep doing it.
Can I say, and I love that, Amy, and we'll keep pushing it. I've got a cute little post with me showing Zeke, my
Oh
dog.
yeah, I know.
So,
I love that photo.
one more thing to wrap up that other question, because I had this little, as we're talking these reality points to go full circle, I made the comment
Yeah,
about being with the gal at lunch and about this guy, it's all okay because he worked in business. I think I actually did this without knowing it. And that's why the conversation was really smooth after that. She was trying to bring it about his person, right? Like protect his person. And instead of me attacking his person and saying he's a bad guy, because
right,
I said, it's just not okay to say this, this, and this. So I made it about what he said was incorrect, not attacking, because you can go back and forth on somebody's person. It's just like the road to nowhere.
right,
And it's
right,
not my job. Honestly, it's not my job, to judge
right,
them. And but actions are actions. And it's not okay to say somebody's a fat pig. It's just,
right,
that's just not okay. But
right.
I'm not going to talk about his person, but for him, that's not okay. And we
That
shouldn't accept
action
that
was
as
unacceptable.
that was unacceptable, whether he works with real estate people or he's in business. That
Right,
is unacceptable. And so it did have a difference. So my point in bringing this up is we actually had a good dialogue in general about, what's okay, what's not, how you read into things, but it wasn't about the person as much. That when we weren't talking about the person, we were talking about the situation, it made for a productive conversation.
right. I love that. I mean, that's the whole point of all this, of addressing actions and not people, because I do think when you start attacking people, then everyone around will be defensive and want to stand up, because there's probably, more likely than not, there's good in everybody, and they're going to want to defend that good. And they also, everybody has different motives,
Right.
but I love that. Good job. Kudos to you.
And just to say, I'd rate it a C. It wasn't like I look back, I listened, I didn't talk, but I'm not here patting myself on the back. It's like I kind of intuitively, part of it was just being quiet and listening without letting it be
Yeah,
a knee-jerk reaction. But what I loved out of all of it is we had a great conversation
yeah,
out of it, rather than everybody protecting a person or debating somebody's worth. We talked about an action and we had a productive conversation that I think we all got something out of.
and you know what, giving yourself a C on that is okay, because nobody's going to go away from one of those conversations saying, yes, I aced that conversation, and I handled it. It's resolved. This isn't going to be a problem again. You know what I mean? I think when you're dealing with this type of stuff, you're going to come away, no matter what you do, not feeling 100% like done. It's
Right.
always going to be like, I handled it, but I'm still, I still feel a little yucky because this all happened. So anyway, I think C is fair. That's
And
good.
the C goes on to the fact that I'm with women that I think a ton of, the people
Yeah.
I was having lunch of, all with great intention, all kinds of different backgrounds. And back to seeking to understand, how you talked about when to say or when to know, is we're all curious. We want to learn from each other. And so I
Yeah.
loved it that the worst, an F would have been that we were never going to bring up the topic again because we didn't want to seek to understand. And where we left it, it's like, when's our next lunch? And I'm glad we can talk about these things together. right?
Right.
It's
Right.
engaging when everybody wants to engage in a conversation, have different perspectives, but it's not to talk about who thinks this guy is good or bad, but let's talk about the issues, the situations, those types of things instead, or things we can learn by.
Right. Very good. All right. So we have a question that we're going to start putting at the end of each podcast, and it's going to tie back to our title, Your Real, Your Ideal. So when we're talking about how I don't work with assholes, first let's talk about what's the real in this situation. And I think the real is that there are these people
There are
out
assholes.
there. They're out there, and
And there's always going to be assholes.
yeah, you can either avoid or you can step up and deal with them. And so you have to figure out, but they're always going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then what about the ideal? I'll let you talk to the ideal.
The ideal is, but we all get to choose. Number one, our inner. I love this. When I was going through my divorce, relationships are very important to me. And when I have a lot of friends, I have a lot of relationships, and I savor them. I mean, they are of people can talk about having physical things. Relationships to me, there's nothing more sacred or brings me joy. But going through my divorce, I had a very good friend say to me, you need to tighten up your circle. Sandy, you got an outer circle and you got an inner circle, and you convolute both of them. Okay. You need to tighten up your inner circle. You can still have your outer circle, but separate what you're sharing. So the point I'd make in the ideal is, even though we have to deal with assholes, do not let them in your inner circle. Do not, or if you can't avoid it and there's so much part of your day to day and you've done all these things, find ways to make your inner circle joyful, because nobody, whether it's the family member or work, nobody should have any one of their core relationships be with an asshole. And take the right steps depending on what type of relationship it is. You're probably always going to have a few in your outer circle because you can't avoid it. I got to tell you, I probably don't have any in mine right now just because of the luxury. And it's a big part of my happiness factor, because my relationship, the nature of an asshole is they're never going to value what anybody else does but themselves. So to the happiness factor, that's a negative, right? Because not only do they not value you, they devalue you, which is, you do the multiplication and it brings it down. So having an asshole in there, however much you can get them on your outer circle, or you're managing them, or situationally, the happier you're going to be. You got to manage your ideal, and usually the asshole factor is never going to help that be higher. So you got to manage around it or make decisions to work around it.
I love that.
And
I was just sitting here thinking,
easier said than done, but it actually isn't. You just have to decide on how to handle it and do it in the right way. You've got to take action.
right.
It's hard to do action against assholes.
Well, and I was just thinking as you were talking, what if we didn't even talk about this? You were the person called out as the asshole.
Mm-hmm.
Like what? And then, we didn't even talk about this, and I don't even know that we have time to go into it, but maybe that's another podcast of, hey, I'm the asshole who did that. And I don't even, I'm hoping that nobody would ever call me out for that.
I'm going to put a teaser. I think this is a good one, actually, because I thought about 3 stories that go with this. And I don't know. Oh, gosh, it's a cuss word again, Amy. Is it the time I was called a lippy bitch? I overheard. How about that? In the workplace. But that was by an asshole. That was by an asshole. And the second one was by somebody very kind that I work with, that he said, you're coming across as a bitch in heels. And I didn't want to, but I mean, that's part of, so I'm going to table that.
Being called out. Yeah.
You got an equal opportunity, bitch in heels.
Right. There you go. I know we can go both ways,
that story.
because I'm sitting here thinking of situations that, I've stood up and people have said, all right, Amy,
maybe
down.
The intention was good, but again,
it was good intentions, but
but we can go crazy a little bit. And it was good. It's
Exactly.
back. Yeah. Whole different conversation. So we'll leave that one alone. Right.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So wrap question today. Are things getting back to normal? How are things there? And I'm talking about like last fall normal.
Here's my thing, Amy. My life has been so non-normal for several
Right.
years, between moving and cities and that I don't even know. How about that? We're so adaptable to
Mhm.
adjusting to whatever the next day brings. And I laugh when my time hop comes up and I see a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, because there's so much change in my life that I'm just going to leave it with, uh, we're enjoying ourselves. Every day brings a new normal. And since I don't know what normal is, it seems very content and fine. How about that?
That's a good answer. Yeah, I agree. Kids are getting back to where they belong. So that feels normal. My work has changed a lot, but it's good. So I think it's normal. You know what I mean? I agree with you. I'm adaptable and I think it's good. We got together with some friends this weekend outside on a patio and it was nice. Like
Nice.
we haven't done that all summer. So it was just a little like, all right, it feels good. I don't know if this is what if things feeling back to normal is good, but anyway, I think
Maybe I've
we're
also
at that
accepted,
point.
I think I've also accepted that, especially with this year, with all the change, all my changes, all the
Yeah,
stuff, that I never I never know what to expect. I'm always planning, right? But yet nothing would surprise me. So
right.
being adaptable, which I think the millennials are really good at, and I've become way more adaptable the last few years than I had before. Um, yeah, I think that if we go back to a normal for a period of time, like back to ways, things that the consistency, I will be pleasantly surprised, but I'm just trying to kind of keep my guard up.
Right. Yep. And I still am cherishing this time. I'm
I love
enjoying
the
it.
word cherish. All right, Amy, you
Yeah.
get to
All
announce our next
right.
episode because it's your
Oh,
pet
yes.
project and I can't
This is
wait.
okay. This is really my thing is keep it real or let's get real. But the, real is an acronym and it's about um, focusing on what's real in your life and making sure that that's the stuff that's being honored. And the real stuff is the things that are realistic as far as your time and your
Right.
space and what's essential as far as your time and your space and what's authentic. You and I have talked about that quite a bit of being authentic to yourself with your time and your space and then livable. Like
Love it.
don't create. So that's the real. It's those words, and we'll talk more about it
And I
next
can't
time.
wait, Amy, and you can help me with back to my new normal and ever changing. I get one thing I have learned is I get a lot of inner peace by when I read this, I thought these are the things that give me inner peace now. And I can't wait for you to help me tie it all together. And rather than happen randomly, how I can be a little bit more intentional about that because I know it makes me happy.
Right. Yes. When you're being intentional about it, that's where the true joy comes from, I'd say. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So are we doing a happy hour with it? You got to tell me.
So define a happy hour. What is it? Are
Rather than
we
doing in the morning,
we're doing an
we're doing
afternoon?
afternoon. I'd say maybe we'll look at the weather, but if we could do
Yeah.
afternoon and sit outside and have a glass of wine and have this conversation, it would
Oh my
be that
gosh.
would be a
Game on.
realistic, essential, authentic, and livable situation.
Yes, I'm in. Let's
Okay,
do it.
weather's good, we're in. All right,
Okay.
everybody,
All right.
goodbye.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks for listening.